He raised $47 billion. He never turned a profit. And when it all collapsed, he walked away with $1.7 billion. This is Adam Neumann, the man who convinced the most sophisticated investors on Earth that a real estate company was actually a technology revolution. That renting office space was somehow going to change human consciousness. That he, barefoot, tequila in hand, hair down to his shoulders, was the next Steve Jobs. He wasn't. But for 5 years, nobody could tell the difference. 2010, New York City. Adam Neumann is 31 years old, Israeli-born, and completely, dangerously certain that he is going to change the world. He had tried before. A baby clothes company with collapsible knees for crawling. It failed. A women's shoe company also failed. But failure for Neumann was just research. In a converted loft in Soho, he and co-founder Miguel McKelvey launched WeWork. The concept is simple. Take large office spaces, divide them into smaller ones, rent them to startups and freelancers who can't afford their own lease. Simple, functional, profitable, if done carefully. Neumann had no intention of doing it carefully. His pitch wasn't about square footage. It wasn't about flexible leases or shared meeting rooms. His pitch was about community. "We are not a real estate company," he told investors. "We are a state of consciousness." And somehow, impossibly, they believed him. The money started flowing, and with money came mythology. WeWork offices weren't offices. They were experiences, exposed brick, cold brew on tap, meditation rooms, slides instead of staircases. The aesthetic of a startup, applied to the mundane reality of going to work. Neumann himself became the product. He walked meetings barefoot. He surfed before board calls. He brought a shaman to company events. He told employees that WeWork's mission was to elevate the world's consciousness, and then handed out tequila shots to make sure everyone felt elevated immediately. It worked. Not because the business model was sound, but because Neumann made people feel that being near him was being near something historic. He signed long-term leases on buildings, 15, 20, 25-year commitments, and rented them out month to month. The gap between what WeWork owed and what it could collect was, from the very beginning, enormous. But as long as the money kept coming in, nobody looked too closely at the gap. Then came SoftBank and Masayoshi Son. In 2017, Son met Neumann for 12 minutes. 12 minutes. He invested $4.4 billion. Son later said that in his experience, the best investments came from people who had a crazy look in their eyes. Neumann, he said, had it. What followed was one of the most spectacular misallocations of capital in modern business history. SoftBank poured money into WeWork, not because the business made sense, but because Son had decided Neumann was a visionary. And once SoftBank was in, everyone else followed. Because if Masayoshi Son believes in something, the logic goes, who are you to disagree? By 2019, WeWork was valued at $47 billion, a company that had never made a profit. That owed more in long-term lease obligations than it had ever earned. That was burning through cash at a rate that would have alarmed anyone who actually read the numbers. Nobody read the numbers. Or rather, the people who read them were told they didn't understand the vision. Because here's what Neumann had built. Beyond the offices and the cold brew and the consciousness elevation, he had built a culture of unquestionability. Executives who raised concerns found themselves out. Investors who asked hard questions were shown the growth charts and told to trust the process. Employees who joined for the mission were kept energized by the energy, by Neumann's physical presence, his speeches, his absolute certainty. The company was structured so that Neumann had nearly complete control. His shares carried extra voting rights. His wife Rebecca, a cousin of Gwyneth Paltrow, which was mentioned more than strictly necessary, was given the power to choose his successor if he died. His dog had a job title. And still, the money came. September 2019. WeWork files for an IPO. For the first time, the public gets to see the actual numbers. What they find is not a technology company, not a consciousness movement, not the next Apple or Amazon. What they find is a real estate company losing $219,000 every hour of every day. The S-1 filing, the document companies submit before going public, reads less like a financial prospectus and more like a philosophical manifesto. The word community appears 150 times. The word profit barely appears at all. Analysts start asking questions. How does WeWork justify a $47 billion valuation when its closest comparable, IWG, a profitable co-working company, is valued at $4 billion? What exactly does we consciousness mean for a balance sheet? Why does the CEO have a personal trademark on the word we? And why did WeWork pay him $5.9 million to license it back? The questions keep coming. The answers don't. Within weeks, the IPO is pulled. The valuation collapses from $47 billion to under $10 billion almost overnight. Then lower. Neumann is pushed out as CEO. SoftBank, having invested billions at valuations that no longer exist, negotiates a rescue package. As part of the deal, Neumann receives $1.7 billion to go away quietly. $1.7 billion. The man who destroyed $40 billion in investor value walks away with $1.7 billion. The employees who had believed in the mission, who had taken equity instead of salary, who had worn the WeWork t-shirts and attended the WeWork summits and genuinely thought they were part of something historic, they watched their options become worthless. By 2023, WeWork filed for bankruptcy. The company that was once valued at $47 billion was worth, at the end, almost nothing. The buildings are still there. The cold brew machines are mostly gone. The slides, some of them are still there, leading nowhere in particular. Now. Here is what the WeWork story is actually about. Not Adam Neumann specifically, not SoftBank specifically. It's about what happens when narrative replaces analysis, when the story a founder tells becomes more valuable, in the minds of investors, than the actual economics of the business. Neumann didn't hide what WeWork was. The numbers were available. The lease obligations were in the filings. The path to profitability was, if you looked for it, clearly not there. But the story was so compelling. The energy was so infectious. The social proof, SoftBank, then everyone else, was so overwhelming that people stopped looking at the math. This is the same mechanism as Theranos, as FTX, as every story we tell on this channel. The charisma is the distraction. The product is what matters. And right now, in 2025, there are companies raising billions on narratives that have very little to do with sustainable economics, on valuations that assume futures that may never arrive, on founders who have that crazy look in their eyes that makes Masayoshi Son reach for his checkbook. The question is not whether you find those founders compelling. The question is whether you read the numbers. Because Adam Neumann was genuinely compelling, genuinely charismatic, genuinely certain, and the company lost $219,000 every single hour. Certainty and math are different things. We follow the math. If this story made you think differently about who you trust with your money and your belief, you already know what to do. The next story is waiting. Stay close.